Welcome to Table Talk, where there's always room at the table. I am your host, Jonathan Harmon of the J Harmon Home Team, and we can't wait to talk to these fine guests. Enjoy the show. We are live now. Mm-hmm. So was the intro not live?
It sure was.
Oh, okay, right on. Mm-hmm. Hey, how you doing, Trent?
Super duper. How about you?
Super duper. I'm a little saturated today. So big announcement real quick. You'll appreciate this too. So there's a bar at the airport in Nashville called Three Casks, and super busy. All they serve is Tennessee beer, and Cedar Glade got selected to be one of their 24 taps, and I delivered. Thank you.
Nice.
Audience. Yeah. I delivered 3 kegs to them this morning at the airport.
Fantastic.
That's awesome.
It was pretty cool. Yeah.
And what beer are you serving there?
So they are carrying our Berliner Off Broad, the one that we flavor with syrups.
Yep.
They said, we've never seen that. We want that. And I said, yes, you do. And so it's going to be, it's pretty awesome.
Very
That's
cool.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah. So I picked up 3 kegs by myself today. And I very much do not recommend that when you get over 40 years old. Really probably any time, but especially once you're over 40 years old. 0 out of 5 stars on that one.
There you go.
Yeah. So, I've got Mr. John Hinkle. What is your title? Are you Reverend?
Technically, I'm Reverend Dr. John Hinkle.
Reverend comes before doctor?
It does.
Reverend Dr. John Hinkle. Okay.
And I'm a junior. There are 3 of us. So
can I call you Rev Doc?
You can if you want.
That's awesome. I like that.
Yeah.
Rev Doc John Hinkle.
John's good. Yeah, John's fine.
And you are First Presbyterian. Is that correct?
That's correct. On the corner of College and Spring.
Right downtown Murfreesboro. Very cool church, by the way. Architecturally speaking.
Yeah. Very unique.
It is. Brett told me one time there's something about an upside down boat in the top of it, or
yeah. So when the I always get this wrong, 1912 tornado hit the square on Good Friday, it basically hit the square and then sat on our sanctuary. That was an old German Gothic style church that was built in 1867. So it was about the same time that Central Christian was finishing up, which is the Gold Dome on Main Street. And so the elders of the church liked what they saw, which was kind of a Greek revival. And they went to that guy and asked, hey, would you be willing to build our church? And he was not an architect. He was a ship mason.
Right.
And that's how he learned construction, was building ships. So if you go into the attic of our church, it really is the bows of a ship. Just flip it upside down. And that's basically what he did, is build a ship upside down.
That's so cool. That's very cool. And it's beautiful. It's a beautiful building. And you guys have been good stewards of that space. So that's pretty cool. Real quick before we get into the conversation with John, Rev Doc, as I like to call him now. Yeah. We do want to hear from Mr. Bryan Nale over at Primis Mortgage, who is a huge supporter of all things Spread the Positive. So Trent, if you will, please.
Yes, sir.
Hey, my name is Bryan Nale. I'm a mortgage loan officer with Primis Bank Mortgage, and I want to tell you that I absolutely love being a member of the Spread the Positive Network. It's such a great mission, and it helps bring so much positivity to our community. It's a true pleasure to be part of. There are a lot of ways to navigate financing a home, and in markets like this, having the advice of a trusted local professional is key to making sure you get the right advice for your specific circumstances. Whether you're interested in the purchase of a new home, second home, or have a need for a refinance, I'd love to earn your trust. If I can help you nail your mortgage, call me at 615-243-3976 or visit nailyourmortgage.com, and I'll be happy to talk with you.
Primis Mortgage is a subsidiary of Primis Bank, a member FDIC, equal housing opportunity. As always, all loans are subject to approval. Primis Mortgage, NMLS number 1894879.
Thank you, Bryan.
Outstanding. We love that guy. You know Bryan, don't you?
I do. He's a Rotarian.
He is. So that's how I've gotten to know John here. John is in Rotary Club with Brett. I guess he joined your club, not the other way around, because you were in there first, right?
Yeah, I've been in Rotary since Yeah, since I got here, 2008.
Yeah. Yeah. So Brett joined, I guess he's been in about 5 years now, 4 years, maybe.
Probably longer than that.
Uh,
Time flies, and COVID messed up our
That's
history.
right. So maybe 6.
Yeah.
Brett, if you're watching, correct me on that. But I think you're right. I think it's probably
Will
more
he
like
call
6.
in? Can he call in? That'd be great.
He can type in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
No one's going to call in.
No, because I
Okay.
usually ignore my cell phone.
I turned mine off.
So got to know John a little bit. Brett's become pretty good friends with you, and I'll just share kind of my church life with you. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've ever really talked about this, but for me, the church thing. Well, before we do that, let's do this. Tell me about your congregation. You told me where it is.
Sure.
What kind of congregation, what size, all those kinds of things.
Yeah. So we are part of the Presbyterian Church USA denomination. It's probably center to left, in theology and maybe in the way we see society. We like to say First Presbyterian Church was a church before Murfreesboro was a city. So we started before Murfreesboro was formed, right where the Discovery Center was, which is Discovery Springs, glorified log cabin, if you will.
Murfree Springs.
Yeah. So Presbyterians came over the Appalachian from, North Carolina because of Revolutionary War land grants. I mean, that's how they got here. And then eventually we moved up on the hill, what is now Vine Street, was Church Street, Vine Street. So if you go to the old city cemetery, that's where First Presbyterian Church was located.
Ah.
We could do a part 2. I could do the church history, and then we can talk about what you want, if you want to do that. Our church is just so deep in the history of this community. We are the only church in the United States that's ever been used for state capitol. When the capitol, I put in quotations, burned down, I'm sure it was a glorified courthouse. They moved the capitol to First Presbyterian Church. They put floorboards that bridged the balcony, and the house met upstairs, the sanctuary, Senate met downstairs. We know 3 presidents worshiped in that congregation, and they were definitely in that building. Andrew Jackson, James K. Polk, whose wife Sarah was a member of our church, and then Sam Houston. I always throw in Sam, of course, the president of the Republic of Texas. We know that Andrew Jackson was nominated to be president the second time in the church. You had to be nominated in your state house in order to run for president. So we know that's where he was nominated. Some have said it is the birthplace of the modern Democratic Party. And then, of course, it definitely played a prominent role in the Civil War. And when the city was a town of occupation, we are the only church that was decommissioned by the Union troops.
It got torn down, right?
It did. And the
bricks were stacked.
The bricks were stacked, and the bricks were used for officer quarters around the courthouse. We also know that, one of the great stories about our church is if you go into our sanctuary, the communion table is in memory of Carter Bassett Harrison. Carter Bassett was the grandson of the president of the United States and the brother of a future president of the United States. And he, at the time when we were a city of occupation, was courting the widow Lytle, thus Lytle, Street, and the Lytle plantation was just over there. And his brother, who was become the future president of the United States, basically told him, you either marry her or dump her, but you're upsetting everybody, the Confederates, the Union officers.
Pick one.
And so they got married, and I'm sure she was convinced that when the war was over, if he survived, that he would come back and bring her and leave to go to Cincinnati, where he was from. When the war was over, he came back to Murfreesboro and said, I really do like it here.
I bet he bought something at Davis Market.
I guess. And so he stayed, and I always point out that communion table as, just a true symbol of reconciliation. We think he was actually oversaw the deconstruction of our church. And I always said, if these Southerners can forgive this Union officer and vice versa, then we can all kind of learn how to reconcile our differences with one another.
That's it. Well, and you know, anytime I've ever had a conversation about I used to be a college ministry leader, and
Yeah.
one of the fun conversations was always, you know, if you could sum up the Bible in one word, what would it be? Right. And that's fun conversation.
Yeah.
So what would your answer be?
You know, I always say now, especially as I've gotten older in my life and in my ministry, I used to be very focused on rights and wrongs and do's and don'ts, and, you know, basically a Pharisee, you know, in the law. You know, now I tell my folks, it's Jesus made it really simple for us. Love God, love neighbor.
That's more than one word.
I know, but that's it. I mean, that's, you know, and then we can figure out everything else, and then let God figure really everything else. But that, you know, it's hard enough to do those two things. So let's just focus on that.
I think my one word is redemption.
Okay. Yeah.
And so when you talk about that story that you just laid out there, that's a story of redemption.
Absolutely.
You know, at both directions.
Both directions.
That's pretty cool.
So what is your religious background?
So, I was going to start talking about that, and then we started talking about your stuff instead. So I was raised Methodist.
Okay.
So was an acolyte in Smyrna First United Methodist.
Okay.
And we went decently often, you know, and Mama dragged us to church and, you know, that kind of deal. And somewhere around 8th grade, I started attending a Church of Christ. So fairly different as far as, you know, the structure and order that is the Methodist to, you know, and theological books that are not just the Bible kind of deal.
Sure. Creeds and confessions.
All of that stuff. Yep. To the only book that we use is the Bible.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not 100% true, but basically the only book we use is the Bible. Right. And it's, you know, it was a huge departure, and I stayed in the Church of Christ for quite a while. I had moments where I kind of wasn't in church at all. You know, go to college and stuff happens, you know what I mean? And go back to church, and a moment of pure transparency and vulnerability here. When I went through a divorce, the church honestly kind of turned its back on me.
Yeah.
You know, the congregation, fairly sizable congregation. There were moments where, you know, for a very long time, there was maybe 1 out of 600 people that really would even talk to me. Even when I was in the building, it was weird.
Right. Did your ex-wife remain in that church?
She did for a little while. And of course, anytime that those type of scenarios happen, people tend to choose sides.
Right.
And they did not choose my side. No. And you know, and I'm not mad about it. At this point, it's become factual. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's not feelings necessarily associated. I mean, there's always feelings, but it's just become a factual way of how I got where I am.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? It's my history.
Absolutely.
And I, you know, since then I've talked to some of the folks that were in there that were my friends that I felt like kind of alienated me, or I alienated myself to them. However you want to look at that. Right. And you know, there's been some apologies. There's been some non-apologies. It's, you know, just kind of one of those things. People are messy, John.
Yeah, very much so.
And when we mess things up, whatever that means, and blame is the most useless, just non-constructive thing that you can do.
Yeah.
I mean, it just really is, because the reality is, in a divorce situation, unless there's some type of a substance issue, and even then it's not very fruitful. Rarely is it, this person did this and this caused all the problems. Like that just isn't the case.
Right.
You know, there can be one person that made a quote unquote, our eyes, bigger mistake than the other one.
Right.
But you don't know what happened.
No, I think that's right. I mean, but life's complicated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, marriage is complicated. Divorce is complicated.
It is. So anyway, since then, I've attended some other churches. I attended I don't even know what you call it, not a non-denominational, but a interdenominational type congregation with my parents for a little while. That ended messy, and that one was not me, by the way, just for the record.
Full disclosure.
I'm not the crazy maker all the time, only sometimes. And honestly, man, at this point, I would say that I am a guy that's still very much curious,
Mhm.
that's still very much intrigued by the notion of God and spirituality and all of that. But I'm just kind of burnt on churches.
Sure. I can understand that. Yeah.
And it's almost like UT fans for me, right? Like I really want to love UT. It's my home state, but man, their fans just get on my nerves, you know? And that's it's kind of where I am. And and I don't want to be there, John. Like I don't want that to be the case.
Yeah.
You know, I absolutely believe that God, if that's what you want to call it, him, her, whatever, creator, higher being, interceding, you know, working in our lives, making things happen, divine. I mean, all of that. Absolutely. I mean, I see evidence of that all over the place, but I don't know how to pull that all back together.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
That is Trent. That is like the most vulnerable I've ever been on a broadcast of any type, just so you know. So
I think it's because I'm here.
I think it is. I'm a little uncomfortable at this point, realizing that I've got.
Yeah. I have that effect on people. I just kind of.
You do.
Their walls just come.
You do.
Kind of like Jericho that just come tumbling.
And I didn't
down.
even have to march around them.
No, you didn't have to march.
No trumpet blowing or anything. I know.
Yeah.
So here's my questions, and I wrote these out, and we kind of walked through these a little bit.
So can we say in full disclosure, that I had no upfront information about what we were talking about today. I just want to make
fact.
In fact, as
this
I
is
said,
how much he trusts me, though.
His administrative assistant said we're going to talk about the community, or so. I was like, okay, I can do that. But yeah.
Well, we are. We're talking.
Yeah,
about
we are, and I'm excited. I just wanted again. To the studio audience.
No way to prep.
Right. Right.
But I knew you were good for this.
Yeah.
So and the reality, John, as I've gotten to know you, there are a handful of people that I truly would feel comfortable talking about my position, my spiritual position, if you will. And you're one of a very small number, because I know that when we talk, you're going to give me something knowledgeable. You're going to give me something that'll appeal to my intellect. You're also going to not shy away from the emotion, which, you know, a lot of preachers are either intellect or emotion.
Correct.
Right. Very few are both. And very few are both effectively. Let's put it that way. But I know that you can do both. And I know you're not going to patronize me. And I know you're not going to tell me, well, all you got to do is pray about it. And here's the deal. Yes, I believe in prayer. I believe it's powerful. I believe, though, that God helps people that seek to help themselves. I think you have to be active in it. That if your only answer is, well, I'm just going to pray about it and hope that, you know, God makes the best thing. I don't buy it. I don't buy that. I think that we make our own luck a lot of times if we want to believe in luck.
Yeah, I was going to say Presbyterians don't believe in luck.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I don't either, really.
Right.
You know, I think
fate, we don't believe in fate. We believe that you have an active role in the life that you're living, and that and we also believe nothing's by chance. There's a reason and purpose for everything.
And that's the one that I struggle with, right? And that's why I think that my word for the Bible is redemption, because I don't think that every single thing that happens has a purpose necessarily, right? But I think that everything that does happen, sometimes bad stuff happens simply because it's a broken world.
Absolutely.
And so when that happens, I think that the opportunity is there for redemption, right? And sometimes bad stuff happens and we don't do anything about it and we don't redeem it, and it's just something bad that happened. And that helps me to accept that God isn't bad. Because if you get stuck in this, right, you can sit back and you can go, why did this 7-year-old die of cancer? Why would God let that happen?
Well, it's the classic, why do bad things happen to good people?
Yeah. Or people that they're not even good or bad. They're not even to that point where they can be good or bad.
Right.
Like a kid.
Yeah.
Right. So anyway, that's what I think. I don't think that everything necessarily has a reason. I think that sometimes the reason, if you have to assign one, is that we're broken.
Well, and I would also say, and because this is what I do for a living and it's what I believe in, is that sometimes that reason is not human, it's divine. It's not up to me to do, as you, I think so well, you put it so well, that, apply a reason to this issue. Well, sometimes that's not our role. And sometimes it just is.
Yeah.
And so my faith says that sometimes God knows what the reason is. And maybe we will never understand, or maybe it'll be a fourth generation kind of thing where we may not understand, but our grandchildren would figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, okay. I'm with you. So here's what I wrote down that I want to talk about.
Okay.
So I don't think that anybody would really argue that when we talk, and for y'all's sake, when I say the church, I'm not talking about your church.
The apostolic church universal.
Exactly. So not any one specific, just the church worldwide. I don't think anybody would argue against this, but the church as a whole is shrinking.
In the Western world, yes.
Yes.
South of the equator, no, it's exploding.
Is it really?
Absolutely.
We'll see. So I just learned something.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
How about in America, right? Since that's where we
can
are.
say Western, the Western world, Europe, United States.
Okay. So my question,
Canada.
First question is why?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. So let's just stay with the United States and maybe even focus just on the Bible Belt. There was a time and place where in Murfreesboro, you couldn't do business if you weren't a member of a church. And you could push it a little bit further. Some businesses, you couldn't do business unless you were part of a particular church.
A specific one.
One. And so I think a lot of what church membership was about was connecting to a body, not necessarily for the sake of your soul, even though I'm sure that came into play, but because that was the community standard. You don't want to be like that guy. That guy doesn't go to church. So, he's either one or two things. He's either going to hell or he's Jewish. Right. I mean, and so that was kind of the role the church played. And the church played a very central role to your life, both socially and theologically, and maybe more, really socially.
And even economically.
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And so it was just,
it's just what you did.
That's right. And I always put it this way, I'm a cradle Presbyterian, always been Presbyterian. But in the day, you were born Presbyterian, you were baptized Presbyterians because we have infant baptism. You were raised Presbyterian. You joined a church as a Presbyterian. You may have gone off and sowed a few wild oats, but eventually you came back because you're now married.
Mm-hmm.
And
you're going to raise your kids.
And repeat the cycle. And then eventually you die Presbyterian.
Mm-hmm.
And that really was kind of the pattern, unless the Baptist saved you in a revival. That's, if you were Presbyterian, you would die Presbyterian. There was definitely a huge, well, let me back up a little bit. After World War II, you and I were talking about the growth of the church. After World War II is the greatest growth the church has ever seen. We planted more new church developments, and we is the apostolic. So Methodist, Baptist, Presbyterians planted more new church developments than ever before. As a matter of fact, if you look at First Presbyterian Church, and this kind of always blows my mind. I don't know why it should. Every church built a new Christian education wing in the 1950s.
Wow.
Why? Because all these soldiers are coming back and now they're having babies. So we got to find, we got to build Christian education wings.
Baby boom.
Right. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. And so we saw this great growth. But in the 1960s, we have this, this all of a sudden, this transformation takes place within our nation. And you can throw out a number of things that were going on. Vietnam War and the escalation of the Vietnam War. You have Martin and Bobby assassinated, John assassinated before the two of them. I mean, our country was in chaos. And for one of the first times ever, there was a question being asked that may not have been asked on a regular basis, but which was why? And not just why is this happening or why are we fighting a war in the jungles of Southeast Asia, but why am I Presbyterian?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even more important, why am I even going to church? And why do I say I believe these things when I really don't know if I believe these things? And so that why question did some good. And part of that good would it freed people up. You know, you could have been, you know, let's just say Lutheran. I'll throw that out. Lutheran all your life. You can go, well, I don't know why I'm Lutheran. But you know, Bill's a Methodist and I really like Bill. So I'm going to go to the Methodist church.
Mm-hmm.
I'm no longer bound by those old social, societal.
Almost an awakening of sorts.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the church didn't see, I don't want to use the word danger. I don't think the church saw where this would take us. And I think where it took us is where we are now, which the why part, then all of a sudden we substitute the church for other things. So we talk about this all the time, at least among my younger couples in our church. When I was growing up, First Presbyterian Church in Dalton, Georgia, always had a family night supper, Wednesday night. And it was covered dish. Love covered dish, family night suppers.
Yeah.
And why? Because the women didn't work. In fact, I was laughing. There was one woman in our church who was a lawyer. And I remember her law firm was right by the Crystals. And she would always rush to come to the family night supper, but couldn't cook a meal. Her husband was a banker. So what did she do? She bought, you know, like 48 crystals, right? You know,
I'm in.
And that's right. I always laugh. What did the kids go to? We didn't go to the green beans. We went to the crystals. I couldn't come close to having a family night supper on Wednesday nights anymore because everybody works.
Mm-hmm.
They all work. The other side of that, though, is I remember playing football at Dalton High. Our head football coach, we got off at 5:00 every Wednesday. Why?
To go to church.
To go to church. And not just the boys, but almost every single one of those coaches.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Coach Chaplin, I know, went to church on Sundays. I mean, on Wednesdays. But now that's not the case.
So is it, I mean, is it as simple as 2-family income and I've got to work? Is it, you know, there's part of me that thinks it's an apathy thing. There's part of me that thinks that we've built in so many distractions that
other forms of entertainment.
Yeah. There's other things to do.
Yeah. When I was growing up, you would have never had Sunday rec ball.
Mm-hmm.
That would have been unheard of.
Mm-hmm. Baseball tournaments on
Absolutely.
Sunday morning.
Right. A travel ball never entered our mind. You know, you played 4 different sports and all 4 different sports had different seasons. Right.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I laugh because we have kids who play travel ball in the fall, you know, fall ball. And I was like, no, baseball's meant for the spring and the early summer. And then you got that period where you could go on vacation and then you started football and then basketball, but that's not the world we live in. And so there's more things that are out there that are attractive or taking away from people who saying, you know, why shouldn't I play baseball? Or why shouldn't my kid play baseball on Sunday?
Do you think do you think it's that simple though? I mean, do you think that's why the church is
shrinking? I think it's more complex. But because that societal draw is no longer there, you know, then you have to ask the question, as you're kind of wrestling with, why then the church?
But I guess my question, so flip that all around, is you said we never would have even thought to have, you know, baseball tournament on a Sunday morning. So at what point does somebody enter the picture and say, hey, let's have this tournament on Sunday morning? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
And to even make that an option, right? To be a distraction for someone.
Right.
At some point they got away from the church enough to where they even thought that could work.
Sure. Yeah. I laugh about that because our son was on a travel soccer team when we lived in Georgia. And one of the reasons we chose that team is because they did not play Sunday matches. So they would look for tournaments, Friday, Saturday tournaments. And, you were in church on Sunday. Or you did whatever you want to do on Sunday. And I remember they were really good. I mean, really good. And our coach all of a sudden said, we really need to get another practice in. Is everybody free on Sunday? And people just started raising their hand. Like, yeah, we could do that. Well, wait a minute. The whole purpose was so that we could be grounded in a church community,
Mm-hmm.
and so that's for me, it's a very simple antidote, but it's one that resonates with me. Society finds the vacuums and they fill it.
Yeah.
And if there's time and space, society is going to try to, I think, move into that sacred space.
So we were talking off camera about when did the church kind of start shrinking?
So one of my favorite books, I'll just throw this out. One of my favorite books is a book by Stanley Hauerwas and Will Willimon. Stanley Hauerwas is an ethicist at Duke Seminary. Will Willimon was the chapel at Duke Chapel, which is absolutely gorgeous. He later became bishop of the North Alabama Conference. And they both wrote this book called Resident Alien. And it's Willimon's story, but Willimon says that the end of Christendom, which is what we would call, the world of where everything centers around the church, ended in, I think he said in 1968, when the movie theater in Greenville, South Carolina played a matinee on Sunday afternoon. And instead of going to youth group, he and his friends snuck out of the church to go to the matinee.
Mm-hmm.
So Willimon says 68. But what he really is saying, it's when all of a sudden you've traded in your tradition or your church for that which is secular.
Something has supplanted.
Absolutely. Someone has taken you away from your focus in your relationship with your church.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think he would argue.
Well, and you threw out the date kind of somewhat arbitrarily basically the mid 80s is when you were saying that it started to kind of shrink.
You could see probably in the early 70s this very slow trend down. They made excuses for it, but even when I was in seminary, though, Jonathan, which was I started in 1990, I never thought we would be where we are now.
Well, and that's what I'm leading to. So what's different now in the church shrink versus even, let's say, 95?
Yeah.
Right. You're out of seminary, you're bright-eyed, and
I think going to church and being connected to a greater body than yourself takes a form of discipline and sacrifice. I tell people all the time, if you miss church once, I understand. We all need to. Maybe go on vacation for 2 weeks, missed it. But eventually you get out of that discipline. I'm sure you've read this somewhere. It takes like 2 months to form a good habit. It only takes 2 weeks to start a bad one.
2 weeks, nothing.
Right.
2 days sometimes.
Yeah. So I think that comes into play. I think that's part of it. I think the why question comes in again. Why do I believe? And maybe the what do I believe?
Or I know why I believe, but why do I need to go to a church building?
Sure.
If I believe enough, isn't that
right? Well, and so so in this moment of decline, and there are a lot of theories that are kind of passed around. Some people will argue that the evangelical church is growing, but really, what I think most people are seeing is that we're not really growing, in the sense that we're just shifting members here and there.
Mm-hmm.
And
especially in an area where there are lots of options. Absolutely.
One of the most fascinating things, I had a good friend who did his doctoral study on comparing megachurches of today to the tabernacle movement of the 1920s. There were churches in the 1920s that had close to 30,000 people.
Wow.
They don't exist anymore. They're gone. And his argument is that a lot of times mega churches, and this is not pointing any fingers or towards anyone, can only survive one generation, because usually they're formed and shaped around an individual, a charismatic individual. The perfect example is Robert Schuller and the Crystal Cathedral, right? So here's one of the largest churches in the West Coast. It's called the Crystal Cathedral. He has one of the largest TV audiences in the United States and in the world. And that church went bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't
happen.
Right. So the question then for me is and the question I talk to people about all the time is, so why church? Why is it that I think it is important for people to connect to the church? And my answer is simply this, is because sometimes we have to be part of something greater than the individual self.
Mm-hmm.
And what really concerns me about society is how individualistic it is, as opposed to being communal, as opposed to be a collection, as opposed to be, in COVID, I kept saying, how is it as a congregation we congregate, that we gather together, that we're here together for one another? And I tell people all the time, Jonathan, I know people can live without the church. I know it. I see it. I just can't.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it would be like, especially, and I think she wouldn't be embarrassed. My wife, I'm a cancer survivor. And then my wife this past year has been battling breast cancer. I would have been, even if I wasn't the minister, I would have been lost if it wasn't for men and women in that congregation who walked alongside of us.
But you can seek community in other places.
You can.
My Rotary Club provides a community. Heck, I own a tap room.
It does.
I have a community there.
It does.
Yep. So why church? To use your question.
Yeah. So for me, there is, again, it's not just being part of something greater than the individual self, but it's also being connected to something greater than the individual self, which is a relationship with the divine in this collective whole. I think that is, to me, that's it is that relationship with the divine that is the glue, right? It is that thing that holds us together, because if not, we're a mess.
We're a mess anyway.
Absolutely. But we're a mess and we're lost, and then the other thing is, Rotary's not meant to be the church.
Right.
I don't need a sermon when I come to Rotary. I want to know what's going on in my community.
Mm-hmm.
I don't, I know I have Rotarians who pray for me, but I don't necessarily need it. Does that make sense? I'm not coming to Rotary to have you lay hands on me.
Different purpose.
Right. It's a different purpose.
Sure.
And the same with the tap room. If I go to the tap room, is there a community there? Yeah, it is. Is it good to see people? Yeah, it is. Do I necessarily want them to do my funeral?
I'll answer that. No.
Right. Love you again, no. And
maybe one or two of you, but
that's not, and so those are some of the questions, I think people wrestle with in this day and age.
Yeah.
Well,
and maybe it's because they don't realize. It's easy for me to say, well, my need for community, because I think that most humans have a need for community.
Absolutely.
I think it's just kind of built into us, right? We're not meant to be alone. We're not meant to be hermits.
It's one of the reasons Leela and I moved downtown.
Yeah.
And even though people mock us when I say we moved downtown, they say,
you're semi-downtown.
You're the university district.
Yeah.
But it's so
you walk downtown more than just about anybody else that I've ever seen.
Yeah. So. Just, to be grounded and connected into something. My dissertation professor said that, the worst thing that ever happened, this has nothing to do with the church necessarily, but the worst thing that ever happened to us as a society is that we build on garages, and that all we have to do is pull our car into the garage, shut the garage door, and we just stay in our house. He said, when in ye olden days, you had front porches.
Yeah.
and people, I'll always love harassing you when I'm on Main Street and just yelling at you. But that's what we used to do. We would walk and see our neighbors on the front porches, and we would communicate and talk. And now we just
or
pull
raking
in,
leaves.
or raking leaves. Yeah,
Lord.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of leaves. Yeah. So, okay. I've gotten away from some of my questions.
That's okay.
Here, but that's okay. This is great.
Yeah, and I will say it's interesting. I had a conversation with a couple in our church who I love, and they love me, who have been, let's just say, their attendance has been few and far between. And my one thing I finally said to him is, what would happen if we weren't in your life? Not that the church disappeared, but we weren't in your life. And they both said we would feel sad. So then my question to them is, okay, then
why aren't you in our lives?
Why aren't you in our lives?
Yeah.
And their answer is because they're filling it with stuff, other stuff.
So I'm tracking with you, but I think that there's also a huge other chunk of reason why people don't go. And I alluded to this with my history, my background. I think there's a lot of people that have been burned by religion, right? And maybe not even necessarily the church, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But by religion and religious people. You mentioned the Pharisees early in this conversation.
Right.
And I know so many people that will say, yeah, I don't go to church because it's a bunch of hypocrites.
Right. And I would always answer back, well, where would you want the hypocrites to go?
Meaning,
like shouldn't hypocrites be in church?
That's fair.
Shouldn't the broken, the lost, they're in it?
But and here's the thing, and I don't know why that just kind of struck a nerve with me.
And let's pause for a second. This goes back. Well, we didn't have this on. Did we talk about divorce? This goes back.
Bit, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but this goes back. I would say to them, you know what? Church is messy.
But a lot of religious people say that. And I've heard so many times hospital for the sinner, all that kind of stuff. But they don't really act on it. At least anecdotally from my perspective.
Yeah.
And I've heard this from other people as well. They don't really act on it.
Again,
a lot of lip service.
It goes back to what I'll just push you a little bit. Let's go back to the divorce analogy. It takes two.
It does.
And so I get a little, I say this lovingly, a little tired of people saying the same old, well, the church is just filled with hypocrites.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there are other churches. I think so often what people try to do is what C.S. Lewis warned us against, which is if you are looking for the perfect church and you find it, do not join because you will ruin it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
There is no perfect church. It's just not out there.
And I think that and so what has started to sound like criticism, okay? I don't mean it that way.
No.
And the reason is there isn't a perfect church, right? And the problem is that anytime you start any kind of new relationship, there's this little honeymoon phase.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, the newness wears off and you start to see a little flaw here. And
absolutely,
they leave their socks on the floor over here.
Absolutely.
And they don't put the cap back on the toothbrush.
Are you talking about the fact that you just got married?
No names. All names have been changed to protect the innocent. And so it's so easy to not connect and to say, this wasn't the one.
Yeah.
Next.
Yeah. Church is a grind. I mean, it can be a grind. It shouldn't always be a grind, but it can be.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. One of the ways I have tried to combat this is this notion of, well, then who's your minister? Now interesting enough, I think you might be Presbyterian because you keep talking about depravity, and that's at the heart of Reformed theology, is that we are broken and depraved individuals, lost to our own means. And if it is not for the grace of God, we would wander this world aimlessly. And so you better believe every Sunday that congregation knows the biggest sinner, as Paul says, is the person standing in front of you. I'm it. I'm the guy. I'm the broken. Now, do I reveal all my brokenness and all my sins? No. Some of those I get to confess to God one-on-one.
Mm-hmm.
But they clearly know, having heard story after story about my failed parenting skills, my stupidity as a husband, even stupid things I've done as a minister. If it's not for the grace of God, I would not be where I am now.
Mm-hmm.
In relationship to the greater body.
Yeah.
There's nothing more humbling. I'll tell you. So in you didn't ask this question, but in August, we did a whole series of sermons on forgiveness, which I said to the congregation, I probably could do a whole year on forgiveness. I mean, if ever I get pushback, if ever I get emails, if ever I get text messages, it is on a sermon on forgiveness. I could preach on the resurrection. I could preach on, I don't know, but pick a subject, but forgiveness is the one. And so we did this whole series in September on forgiveness. And sure enough, emails, it's another podcast in and of itself. But I said something. So our governing body is called the session. And I said something in the meeting where my tone was bad. The content was spot on, but it was a moment where I was frustrated, and I acted on that frustrated and said it in a way that was not becoming.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew driving home, I had to go to that individual the next day to ask for his forgiveness. Now, the first thing he said is, "Oh, you don't need to do that." Well, no, I just preached a whole series on forgiveness. I've got to do it. And I was wrong. I told him that I was wrong. I was very specific about tone, not content. And he agreed to that.
Yeah.
He said, your content was absolutely right. And he knew he pushed me. Like, he even said that. He said, I knew I was like poking the bear, but we're closer now than ever before.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, I mean, that makes sense. And that's, I mean, it may be a spiritual concept, but it's a human nature concept as well.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
When you can move through a conflict and you can come out on the other side of it. You hope that it drives you closer and not because now we have a common history. We've worked through something.
Absolutely. And so part of when you, again, the question of why church is what I tell my congregation, you and I talked about it before we started, is the church has to be authentically the church. If we're anything else,
that's what I was going to ask.
If we're anything else, then
so what does the church do to stem the loss? Right? How in a perfect world, if you're writing the script, how does the church turn the tide and get back to growing rather than losing? What do they do? Because I mean, I'll list them real quick. Mm-hmm. They weaponize, right? You hear all these complaints against the church. People weaponize religion, mm-hmm. right?
Great.
The whole love the sinner, hate the sin has been a weapon used against almost specifically homosexuals
Absolutely.
For years.
Yeah.
Right. And it's terrible. Like I hate hearing that now because what you really mean is,
hey, it's not in the Bible.
Right. But what you really mean is I'm better than them, but I'm going to be graceful.
Right. 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 It's, love the sinner, hate the sin. But I forgot I'm just as broken. I'm just as depraved.
Right.
Yeah.
So all of those
somehow
things,
my sin is less than their sin.
Yeah. And because I confess it to God, therefore my sin is less. I'm not with that, Yeah. Maybe you're forgiven for it.
Yeah.
But your sin isn't less.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And the consequences of your sins still play out in your life.
Mm-hmm.
You can ask for forgiveness.
Right.
And I believe
maybe not eternally, but definitely earthly. Yeah.
That's right.
So all of these things going on, right? The whole hypocrite thing, all of these things going on. How does the church turn it around? And what should they do? And to your point, what should they not do?
So I would ask you a question. What does turning it around mean? Because I don't think.
Is it growth?
No.
Okay. So what is it then?
I think it is growing deeper in your relationship with Jesus Christ in communal relationship, meaning I'm not doing it by myself. I'm not spiritual by myself. I am with other human beings in this journey together.
So you gauge the growth of the church on the growth of the individuals within the church, not the sheer numbers of people in pews.
I think there is something to say when the church grows. We should celebrate when someone comes into our congregation. That's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that going to get us salvation? Absolutely not. Again, I worry about when churches say, "Oh, we baptized 500 people today," and then 20 years later, where is your church? I don't think church growth is. In fact, Jesus would be very clear about this. Church growth doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing my Father's will.
Sure, the whole straight and narrow concept.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what we see, and you and I were talking about, I think, again, we've been at this podcast for a while.
We have. This has been one of my longest ones.
The church south of the equator is growing. And so I have very dear friends in Brazil, in Egypt, and in Syria. The church in Syria is exploding. The church in Egypt is exploding. The church in Brazil is exploding. And you ask them, why are you exploding? And they're not mega churches. You ask them why they're exploding. It's because we find relationships with other human beings, close, intimate relationships with other human beings. And then when we get a certain size, we start a new church.
Almost like a home church type.
Absolutely. In fact, that's why the church in Egypt has grown, is because you really have kind of three religious groups. You have Muslim, you have Coptic Christians who are forced because of their theology to worship in a building. And then you have the Evangelical Reformed Church, and they don't have to worship in a building. And so especially when there was a lot of, when the Muslim Brotherhood came into power in Egypt, there was a lot of persecution of the Coptics because they knew where the Coptics worshiped.
They were visible. Right.
The Evangelical Church, well, I'm just visiting Jonathan on Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
And they have worship. That's true for the underground church in China. It's when we, all of a sudden, I think it's when we think we have to get bigger and bigger, we lose sight of what's really important. And that's that relationship we have with one another.
So is that a materialism issue unique to quote unquote developed Western civilization?
Yeah, I think it is from our history. I mean, if you've traveled to Europe, what
beautiful buildings,
absolutely
gilded.
What's the only thing you see? It's the spiral of the steeple. It's
mm-hmm.
the church was the center of the life of the community,
mm-hmm.
and therefore the assumption was you had to be the center of the life of society. Well, when society rejects the church, what happens to those churches who feel like
they're shells?
Yeah, they really are. Absolutely. But then, I've worshiped, for example, Trinity Church in Cambridge, England. Leela and I had the opportunity to worship with them. It's one of the oldest Anglican churches in Cambridge. That church is vibrant and alive. Why? Because there are people who are connected to one another in community.
Mm-hmm.
While you go, throw a stone, you hit another Anglican church and there's no one in there.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're so focused on the past, they can't move towards the future. They remember, this goes back to your question, can the church rebound? Or, I said to my congregation the other day, our church has an amazing history. And, you closed your book, so I assume that you're hungry and
I'm out of questions.
We're going to dinner.
Now we're just talking.
But
we can go to dinner.
But I said to my congregation, and they know our history, and we have an amazing history. But if that's all it is, if we're constantly looking back, then we might as well close our doors.
You're going to die.
That's right. Our history is meant to move us forward. Our history, it only has meaning when we continue to fulfill our purpose.
It's context for your current actions.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how I look at that.
Yeah. And last but not least, it's not just being connected to one another. It's not just being connected to divine, but we always say, just as we have gathered to worship, now Jesus calls us out into our world. I say all the time, you've heard me say this, where the square goes, there goes First Presbyterian Church. Our ministry is focused with Greenhouse Ministry, Journey Home, Doors of Hope. churches
within a half mile.
That's exactly right. While our congregation started a medical clinic in the mountains of Nicaragua, and we provide medical care for 4,000 people. That is great, and it is. But we have just much of a need in downtown Murfreesboro.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. John, we've been going out this for a while, dude.
Yeah, man.
Trent, is this the longest one I've had so far?
Pretty sure. Yep.
Yeah. You should hear my Dow Smith podcast I was on.
Man,
just
I love
long.
You some Dow.
Dow is just
Dow's
like,
awesome.
let's keep this guy on.
Yeah. Buddy, I appreciate you very much.
Absolutely.
And if you have questions, if you are doubting, if you just want to have a conversation about the church with somebody that knows what's going on, that isn't going to just try to get you to, say a certain prayer or whatever, but it's going to really talk to you like a human being and treat you, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like a human being.
Yeah, but like treat you like an equal and not a superior.
Well, I do want to say this. One of the things I'd say it very clearly, we're not the only game in town. I am so grateful, especially for the downtown churches, for my relationship with Glenn Money at First Baptist, Christine Blas at St. Paul's, in East Main, even East Main. We've worked on things together in Central Christian. There is a place. It's just a matter of seeking that out, being intentional and saying, you're not going to become part of a church community by osmosis.
Right.
It will take effort.
Yeah.
It would take effort.
At least showing up.
Yeah.
It's a good way
They say
start.
it takes going to church 6 Sundays in a row to fully recognize what that church offers. Go once, you'll never do it.
Yeah.
But take 6 Sundays in a row.
There you go.
All right.
Hey, buddy, I appreciate you.
I loved it.
And if you have questions, hit John up. He's always accessible over there at First Presbyterian. And I want to see you in the attic someday.
Yeah. We still need to do that. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Thanks. If you have any other questions about real estate, give me a shout. I know this had nothing to do with real estate, but hey, give me a shout anyway. If you need anything with mortgages, give my friend Bryan a call. And I guess that's it. Trent, thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate you. Appreciate Spread the Positive, and appreciate you guys. Have a good day.
Thank you.